Well, hello everybody. Welcome to another live stream on History Valley Podcast, and also welcome viewers from Critical Faculty. We are streaming simultaneously to both channels, and yeah, this is my first time interviewing Hanney Seylim. Hanney Seylim from Critical Faculty. His channel is tagged below the video, and he'll also be interviewing me too. So we're kind of interviewing each other. That's basically what we're doing. So yeah, we'll just. I kind of want to start off with you first, Hanney. And I'd like you to discuss your journey about how you came to leave Islam. What were the circumstances that caused you to doubt the religion, and basically just go from there.
Right. Well, my journey sort of differs from a lot of other Muslims or people with that sort of background. Because I have not suffered because of religion. I was born to kind of a strange family, to an Egyptian father and an Irish mother. So I was born into a household that has sort of two different backgrounds. My father was already an atheist. He left Islam already, and my mother was a sort of a hippie Christian, believes in spirits and things like that. So she wasn't really practicing. And my father was very well read, so that we had a library of everything, you name it, from Nietzsche to the Old Testament. So I had access to everything, and I had the freedom to choose what I wanted. This is how sort of I grew up. When I was a teenager, I sort of wanted to take my father on, like as you do. It's the first Freudian thing you do. You're a man now, so you take on your father. And I said, I'm gonna convert to Islam, just to rub it in. And he smiled. 18 months into the journey, I realized the whole thing was bogus. And I remember quite clearly the big smile on his face. But he didn't tell me, I told you so, but it was quite apparent in his face.
It kind of reminds me, at least some of it kind of reminds me of my journey.
Oh, really? Okay. How was yours?
Was it some different? But there was some differences. I want to focus for the moment. I want to focus more on yours, but just to interject on it just for a moment. I started out an atheist. I never converted, so there's a difference there. Although, as I've stated in past interviews, that yes, at some point the fear of hell really scared me. You got people out there that was like trying to tell you, oh, you're going to go into eternal hellfire forever and ever and ever unless you accept Jesus into your heart and all that kind of stuff. So this is from the Christian scenario or in the Islamic scenario. And so I was more, at some point around, I would say 2011 to 2013, somewhere around there, I was kind of a confused atheist, is the way I would put it. It was like going back and forth, wrestling with the issue in my mind. I was like, you know what? No, this is bogus. I'm not going to allow myself to totally accept this. So that's the point. That's to some quasi similar point conclusion that you came to, but you came to it from the Islamic vantage point. But the primary difference is that I didn't really fully accept it at all. So that was the main difference there. But I'll expand more on that later. Hanney. But I'd like you to dig into to tell us a bit more about like what was the exact circumstances that caused you to say, okay, Islam is bogus. I'm out of here. I don't believe this stuff anymore.
Yeah, well, first of all, I wanted to ask you a quick question because for some reason, because of your family name, I thought you might have a Jewish background, but it's not. Yeah.
No, I do. My father's side.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, okay, Berman. Yeah. So you're not a true Jew because your mother needed to be Jew, so for you to be a true Jew.
Yeah, I get that from some people that are trying to like some people that commented on my channel in the past and try to say that, trying to throw it at me. I'm like, okay, whatever. So it's like you're trying to throw it at me, you know. It's kind of like, it's like, okay, what do you care? What's your problem? But I guess the way I can put it is I guess it matters more if you're a theist from that vantage point. That's just the way I'm going to put it, and I'll just stop there. But yeah, Hanney, can you tell us a bit more about what was the circumstances that caused you to conclude Islam is bogus?
So yeah, so because of my background and the sort of the library and the way we were brought up to, we were sort of taught the right things, you know. So when you research something, you do it properly, and you kind of sort of try to be as neutral as you can. And I've always been interested into science. Science is very important in my life. Actually, as a matter of fact, I don't do faith bashing as much as I do science education and philosophy education. That's like my real passion, because I'm not a person who thinks religious people are stupid or has sort of a psychological disturbance. I look at religion as a lot more nuanced than that. You know, I have a very different point of view, and some atheists, especially in the Arab world, actually sort of disagree with me on multiple things because they want to, even though they left Islam, I think Islam hasn't left them, and they sort of bring their points across in almost a violent way, but this time in disagreement. So I've never been that kind of person. I'm a person of, I don't think Muslims are stupid or disturbed. I just think they are wrong. And anybody can be wrong. Einstein was wrong at some point, you know, and was proved wrong by quantum mechanics at some point. So things like that. The way I tackle things, there's a lot more different than your typical Muslim, where I just bring the Hadith and the Quran. There's a lot more depth to it. But scientific issues in the Quran, you know, in complete contrast with cosmology, like the movement of the sun, obviously the creator of the universe, and I think it's been repeated again in the Old Testament. You know, how can the creator of the universe doesn't know how the day and night happens? You know, the story of Joshua, where he needed to win the war, so God held the sun still so the day can be longer. And if God knew better, he would be holding the earth to stop it rotating around its axis. So I was like, what the hell? What's going on? Weird things like that. And then went to the moral slavery, the marriage of those girls who didn't even sort of reach adulthood. We're talking about 9 years old and 7 years old and things like that. So it's moved from scientific inquisition to eventually the moral realm, and then the whole thing sort of collapsed. It was quite evident that this could not be the creator of the universe if one existed.
And I guess I'll explain what was like the end of my confusion. So
Yeah, I'm
sort
curious.
of quasi-equivalent, the sort of quasi-equivalent of that. And just like yourself, it wasn't the typical way either. From my vantage point, it's like, okay, I want to know why people take these religions seriously. I want to know where these religions came from, when they came from, what were the circumstances that caused these religions to rise and become so influential. What happened? I want to know the history of it. And as you can probably guess, that eventually led to me creating this channel and doing what I do. So I was going through the Torah, and this is around 2013. And I'm going through the Torah. I'm getting to Deuteronomy, which is supposedly the 5th book of Moses, if one believes that Moses wrote all of that, which I obviously don't. Anyway, in Deuteronomy, there's a very curious passage in chapter 32, verses 8 to 9. That's where it is. And basically, it talks about that that Adonai, as Yahweh is called Adonai, or Hashem, which means the name. Adonai is the Lord. So Adonai inherits Israel from Ha-El Elyon, the Most High God, the Most High God. I was puzzled. I'm like, wait a minute now. How is it that God can inherit from another one? And I wasn't too familiar really at all with the scholarship at the time. And I'm like, what is going on here? I'm like, it's like, And what's kind of funny is that there are Christians who believe Christians that believe in the Trinity. Not all Christians accept the Trinity, but a lot of them do. They'll say, "Oh, well, they would say God inherited from himself somehow because Jesus is God, Holy Spirit, that sort of stuff." I'm like, "Oh, okay." That's bizarre because what they're doing is they're anachronistically throwing in the Trinity in the Hebrew Bible. Jews do not believe in a Trinity. So how do you make that work? Anyway, just like the Mashiach ben David, the Messiah, is not supposed to return. He's not supposed to come, die, rise again, and then come back later. Nowhere in Judaism, in the Hebrew Bible, does it say something like that. But then again, they try to make it work with Jesus. They try to find passages in the Hebrew Bible, try to make it look like it foretold Jesus coming in the first place. So I'm like, okay. But anyway, just to go back to where I was going with the inheriting thing. So the Lord, or Adonai, or Yahweh, whatever you want to call him, inherits Israel from another God. And there's a ton of scholarship on the matter. And I realized, so God has a father? So I asked myself, God has a father? Really? I was like, this is ridiculous. How can somebody be a monotheist going through this and seeing that? Come on. But then it starts making a whole lot of sense when you start piecing it all together. Like, for instance, in the Ten Commandments, God says, I am a jealous God. Well, how can you be jealous if there's no other God? Or situations like, I think it was Naaman who put Israeli soil into 2 carts. And so that way he can, then he put it in his shoes, something like that. So that way he will be walking on Israel technically while being in a foreign country. Because he's going outside of the inheritance. King David complained that, hey, y'all need to stop chasing me. I'm going to have to start worshiping foreign gods as I'll be going outside of the inheritance of the Lord. I'm like, so these are all fitting and creating a conclusion that doesn't sound like it's going to help monotheism at all. God has a father. That's the deal. I'm like, okay. There's a passage, it's in the Quran, and it actually says something similar. It's Surah Al-Imran 3:180, I believe that's where it is. And it says something about Allah's inheritance. I'm like, okay, well, how does where's Allah's heritage coming from? I thought there was no God but Allah, or Allah can have parents, obviously, right? Where's this heritage of Allah coming from?
There's even one that is even more obvious where Allah is talking, he is the greatest of all creators. I mean, it's almost like the Elohim all over again type of thing.
Good point.
Don't take any other gods before me. When you say don't take any other gods before me, that's kind of if you use a bit of deduction, that means that there are other gods. So it's the whole thing's been fishy from day one.
Yeah, and you can totally see where the composers of the Quran got these elements from. They were looking at the Hebrew Bible. They saw similar passages, including the ones that I'm talking about. And that's how they got that stuff that you're talking about from. Because there are similar passages in the Bible that say those kind of things. What you just said about him being the greatest of all creators is similar to I'm a jealous God. Well, how can you be jealous if there's no other God? Yeah.
Even you can't even invoke symbolism if you try to really so hard to say, well, those who are like semi-gods or pretending to be gods, or sort of like humans, like kings, and those who want to be in the image of God. It still doesn't work. There are so many areas where creation. And we're talking creation, which is out of nothing. But even if you examine the Bible quite closely, you'll never find God creating out of nothing. It's always using elements, even like water was around when his spirit was still hovering over the water. So there was never a point where God created anything from scratch. Yet the word creation is always in people's mind, that creating is like, say, the word in Islam, we say if God wills something to be, he would actually say the word be. So it's a magic word like abracadabra. I don't know why he would need to invoke a word, because you think telepathy, Charles Xavier in X-Men probably would display better talent by not even uttering words for things to happen. So it was very strange from day one. The characteristics of God are one of it's just a great man. The humanity thought about what the greatest being could have looked like, and they've just made one of us. So God was created in our image, but just made him, instead of knowing, all knowing, instead of merciful, all merciful, and just another human, because he gets angry and he laments and regrets things like the flood, where he had to put a post-it note for himself on the fridge by putting that rainbow to remind himself not to drown people again.
Yep. I want to take the super chat question real quick. Jesus Tales, thank you very much for your super chat. What is your stance on Arabic-speaking Christians using Allah to refer to God?
Well, Allah isn't really an Islamic word. It's an Arabic word for the word God. So it's quite normal for Christians. Like, my father is from Egypt, so I sort of lived in Egypt for about 8 years of my life, and there's about 15% of Egyptians are Orthodox Coptic Egyptians, Coptic Christians. Coptic doesn't mean Christian. Coptic means Egyptian, or in ancient Egyptian language. But there were deep Christian roots in Egypt, and they say the word because that's the Arabic word for God.
Yep, and it's similar to El, God in Hebrew. Yeah, it's because Allah basically means the God, right? Basically,
Allah, yes, the God, yeah. So it's really just a sort of linguistics situation, but obviously Christianity might not necessarily would say that all the time. They will say Yeshua, which is the Arabic word for Jesus. Which is a lot of people think his name is Jesus, and I would actually steal this from Bart Ehrman when he says, right, a lot of people think this is his first name and Christ is his family name.
That's true. Yeah, his name is really Yeshua. Yeah, at least that's what it would have been. Yeah. When you were leaving Islam, and in the process of leaving Islam, did you also notice things like where Islam is borrowing ideas, not just from Judaism, obviously, but from Christianity, and also kind of like retrofitting it, making changes, and also conflicting with the Bible?
Well, definitely the Torah, because Judaism and Islam are very, very similar in the roots, but they didn't understand Christianity. They got it so wrong. When they spoke about the Trinity, they spoke about the Father, the Son, and the Mother. They didn't understand what the Holy Spirit was. Neither do the Christians, mind you. So they got it really wrong. They never understood, because Christianity is such a different religion. See, culture makes religions, and Judaism and Islam are very similar in their foundational beginnings. They were talking about nomadic people who sort of didn't have sort of stable culture. They were sort of moving around, and their gods are as harsh as their environment. But Christianity was sort of created in the sort of bosom of a little bit of an empire with the stability. It's got all the tragic Greek tragedy fingerprints all over it. A weeping God and a God that's sort of crucified for us and comes back as a redemption story. One of the five Hollywood's main stories. It's the redemption. Everybody loves the redemption story. And things like that. So it's completely, the God of Christianity is almost a departure from the God of Judaism and Islam. So when Islam talks about Judaism, they get it roughly right. When they talk about Christianity, they fall on their asses, like they have no idea what they're talking about.
Doesn't it in the Quran state a different name for the Son of God? And they think that that Jews believe in a Son of God, and I think it said Ezra or something like that.
Yeah, Ezra is the Arabic word. I don't know who the hell is that. Like, I think they got it really wrong, because the Jews never talked about the Son of God. Maybe as in colloquial, as in a pious person, but not in the Christian sense whatsoever, as in sort of a divine being of such. So they got it really wrong. It's almost like they wanted to paint the same brush that Christianity sort of created, and say, well, Judaism as well, sort of because Muslims believe Judaism and Christianity were corrupted, and they actually believe that the books, the full Torah, they don't understand that the Torah is only the 5 books of the Old Testament, and the rest are written by man. They think the whole book was given to Moses by God, just like Muhammad received the Quran. And they also thought the gospel, they think there's one true gospel hidden underneath the Vatican, because Muhammad's name is written in it, and the whole world will know the truth. They don't understand that even Christians understand that the gospel were written by men as a biography of Jesus with 4 different points of views. They have no idea. They think these books were literally written way before these people were created, and they're like a holy thing. So they get a lot of things wrong in the Quran, to be honest.
I fished in a tie. Thank you for your super chat. Do you fear for your safety? Speaking about Islam.
Not really. I live in Australia, and I've lived in Europe pretty much all throughout my life. But even when I was in Egypt and left Islam, I was still I don't know. Because I'm very respectful. I don't go bashing. I do the Socratic method, where I go and ask questions and just leave people think about this. So they know they sort of tend to ignore me. And I focus on science quite a lot. So, but I kind of, in a very mischievous way, I would actually sort of link it to a sacred text without directly criticizing it. Like talking about science, talking about biology, explaining evolution, and then explaining the absolute absurdity of that we all come from a male and female because of a founding biology situation where it's called minimum founding population, where the genetic pool would be absolutely poor, and you won't have few generations after that because there are no varieties in the genetic code. So things like that makes people think and learn a bit of science, and then get them to sort of question, okay, is this symbolic or did it really happen?
Right. Why so religious? Thank you for your super chat. How about Allah sent Muslim prophets to people that never became Muslim? They became Jews and Christians. Allah never says any of his Muslim prophets had Muslims following them in the Quran.
Trying to sort of understand the grammar of the question here. Send Muslim prophets to people that never. So it's not really Muslim prophets. It's just one who then sort of conveyed Islam. Mind you, a lot of Muslims think that all religions are of Islam, or like a sort of introduction to Islam, and therefore all prophets, including Moses, are sort of conveying Islam, but a different version of it, like the sort of the 1.0 and then 1. Like almost like a software updates until you find the final version of it. So when Islam came, there were Christians. As a matter of fact, the person who discovered that he is a prophet of God was the Christian cousin of his wife Khadija, because when he told him about his encounter with Gabriel conveying the Quran, the guy was obviously a Christian and sort of familiar with the story. Then he said, "Oh, that you are one of the God's prophets." Mind you, he never converted to Islam. He stayed Christian throughout. So I don't know what he was playing at, to be honest. But yeah, Jews and Christians remained. A few have converted, mainly because of the sword. Because in the first 13 years of Islam, where were no armies or soldiers, Islam was only 70 to 80 people for 13 years. Only after he sort of recruited some criminals from the mountains around and created an army, in the latter 10 years, he actually managed to invade other neighboring cities and convert them by the sword. And this is where the glory days started.
Yeah. To go back to my Ezra thing, because I know that the person's actually called Uzar, and it's assumed that is Ezra. But either way, regardless if that's Ezra or not, it's still wrong that Jews believe in a son of God. Doesn't matter who that is. I just want to throw that in there real quick. If you had to pick just one big thing that bothered you the most, that led to your deconversion, what would that be?
Oh, there's so many, but slavery really stood out for me, because I could never understood for the life of me a God who bans the eating of the pork with such a definitive verse, like straightforward, and makes a big deal out of it, and neglects to talk about. Well, he actually didn't neglect to talk about slavery. He actually sort of put some laws and governing rules, harsh ones, of that. And I know Judaism has similar, and even Christianity, where Paul didn't really have a problem, and actually said the slave should obey their Christian master. So it seems like God had 3 goals at abolishing one of the most horrible thing humanity will ever get to know, and cares about lobster, shrimps, and pork. I just don't understand it. I don't get it.
Yeah, it's just like, for me, I had a big issue with 2 things. The first thing, obviously, from a similar vantage point of understanding that the Bible just seems so obviously immoral. Like, it's just a massive tyrannical war god, genocidal god, and it's amazing to me that when apologists make excuses for this god, but if gods or religions do that, they're bad. But if the God of the Bible does it, that's okay for some reason. It's like, you're reading it wrong, he'll say. You've heard similar things about the Quran, not similar excuses. It's just mind-boggling to me, really is. Did you want to say something about that real quick?
Yeah, well, it's obviously will invoke the issues of morality, and it's been said from the beginning, even before Christianity, that infamous conversation between Euthyphro and Socrates, where so what is morality? Does God say something because it's good on its own? So why do you need God if something is good on its own? Or is it that it becomes good when God says so, and therefore morality is arbitrary, because God can tell you something and it's good, and 5 minutes later the complete opposite, like he did with the Jews in Exodus. Really was worried about his favorite people, and then as soon as they're out, the Amalekites, they're going slaughter them all, and don't forget about the virgins, keep them for yourself. And it's like, okay, well, obviously then morality is arbitrary, because it's the same here, but because it's happening to his favorite people, he was upset. And these are other people who don't believe in me, so they can, So morality has always been an issue for me, because if we're going to reach a universal morality away from religion at some point, and I know it's still under contention because there's a lot of horrible things happening in the world at the moment, and there's a lot of double standards, and humanity's still a long way to go, but at least it's our own. We know the baggage, we know the cons and the pros, and we know how to deal with it, we know the issues. But I don't think morality has ever come from heaven. It's evolved as a necessity within us, because if we didn't have them, we didn't have rules of engagement to start with, we would have not survived. The Homo sapien 300,000 years ago must have had some code of conduct like animals do to be able to coexist. Otherwise, we would have been gone. So it is an emergent property that must emerge necessarily without any exterior influence.
Yeah, exactly. What kind of excuses do apologists of the Quran try to give? Like, okay, why Allah forbade eating pork or other things or other food? Like, why does Allah care so much about that stuff?
Well, God doesn't give you excuses. Like God, even the Jewish excuse, which is the cloven hoofs, and pigs have cloven hoofs, but they don't chew their food. So it's a very strange criteria to really stop anything from being eaten. And then obviously Jesus came and said, it's not what goes inside of you that it makes you filthy. It's that's what comes from within you. So then, therefore, pigs are okay to eat. In Islam, it's about, I think they tried to copy again the Jewish regulations, but they didn't understand the chewing and the cloven hoofs thing. So they're sort of related to just impurity, and they're filthy animals. But if anybody watches the behavior of pigs, who are actually very smarter than dogs, they're just not any different than cows and goats and chicken. You'd be surprised when they do these things and when they're trying to feed. So it's as a matter of fact, pigs can actually be quite clean if you put them in clean environments.
Fish and Ty, thank you for your super chat. El, Yahweh, Jesus, or Muhammad? Who is the most moral? Can Jacob and Hanney both answer, please? You want to go first, Hanney?
No, after you. I've spoken a lot.
Okay. When looking at El, and not just from what the Hebrew Bible says, but also the Canaanite text, I would say El is nicer. That's my answer. Hanney?
Well, to start with, we know that Jesus and Muhammad historically existed. I'm not a mythicist, so I believe in a historical Jesus and a historical Muhammad. Muhammad came back. Yeah. So these people existed. So we can actually talk about them in a different way than El and Yahweh would sort of never prove to exist in the first place. So these were ideas in people's heads. We can obviously talk about what people thought they've done, but it won't be a good thing. But El and Yahweh are sort of out of question for me, because I don't care for them too much. These are ideas within people's heads. But these two people who actually truly existed, historical people, then morality is kind of relevant. Muhammad was horrible, absolutely a monster, like horrible. Jesus was a hippie at best. He's just a rabbi. He was spreading the good news. However, there's something sinister about Christianity that's a lot more sinister than the clumsy Judaism and Islam, because Judaism and Islam would just kill you, and that's the end of the matter. That's the worst they can do. And I think what's worse is to zombify you, like to make you a zombie in terms of feeling guilty, even though you've done nothing. A baby that comes out of its mother's womb is guilty by the original sin, and there is a sinister, passive aggressive behavior in Christianity that can keep you alive, but just to suck your blood. Like it's like truly. So I fear that, because once you're dead, you're dead. It's just gonna chop your head. You're done for. But to keep you alive and to keep you like a sort of a robot or somebody void of critical thinking, I think it's way worse to me.
Right, I agree, because yes, El and Yahweh are just ideas. All I was saying earlier is that as a character, El comes across nicer. That's all I meant by that. And like I said earlier, I did say likewise, yes, I do think Jesus and Muhammad existed. I'm not a mythicist either, never been a mythicist. Yeah, I try to do my best to understand where mythicists are coming from, and I sort of get why they think the way they do, but I just don't think that in the end that their case makes much sense. And generally, like, okay, if Jesus and Muhammad didn't exist, it seems to me that one's going to have a very hard time explaining how either religion originated. What was the process that they were made up then? How did that happen? I just don't see it.
But it can be a hybrid, because I think it's a hybrid. The actual historical person existed as a warlord in case of Muhammad, and as a rabbi in case of Jesus, but there's a lot of myths still spun around him. The walking on the water, the turning the water into wine in the Galilee wedding, the splitting of the moon of Muhammad. These are the myths. So you can actually combine the two elements. But the thing is, I like to follow science. I like to follow proper academic work and the consensus in history by those who have no quarrel, even don't care about the religious, non-religious conversation. They care about documents and manuscripts and evaluating things sort of impartially. The consensus is with these two people who have existed historically, but the stories around them, they're definitely myths.
Here's a question that will kind of cross over our discussion of. It's kind of already been crossed over anyway on Christianity and Islam, but to further that, there are people out there that will come at me and say that Islam does not say, the Quran does not say that Isa, however it's pronounced, and Jesus, but who is Jesus, was crucified, or actually he was. So when you read the Quran, did it seem to you that Jesus was crucified or not? What does the Quran say?
The Quran says that he was actually made to look like Jesus. So the true Jesus was never crucified. And there's a lot of people say, oh, that would have been Judas Iscariot or somebody else. Imagine being sort of grabbed by God, and you've done nothing, you have no idea what's going on, and you made to look like Jesus. Or was it a clone? Or it's like, it's horrible story, because then they kind of sort of say to you as well, the God, because everybody who saw Jesus or Jesus lookalike being crucified had been deceived by God. So the Islamic version is a very strange one, because these people literally saw Jesus being crucified. God didn't tell them it didn't look like them. They thought and then he got resurrected, and then they believed in Jesus, and then they got corrupted because they don't believe that, like Muslims, that he was just a prophet. Okay, well, if he was just a prophet, why'd you go through the length of make it sound like it's miraculous? And then when these people end up believing in him, saying, "Oh, sorry, that's like centuries later when it was revealed in Islam. Oh, sorry, that wasn't the true Jesus. That was somebody else that made to look like him." It's a very strange story, but it's a story that obviously trying to make sure that God is one and no other partners. And the only way to get around it is making Jesus just a prophet. Otherwise, he's one with God.
The idea that somebody else was crucified, not Jesus, but that person was made to look like Jesus, is very old. Like, even as early as the late 2nd century CE, church fathers like Irenaeus knew about this, like a group of Gnostics, like Simonians. They I think he was talking about Simonians, but anyway, a group of Christians or denomination of Christians that said it was Simon of Cyrene who was crucified, not Jesus. Now, a long time later, you get a variant of that story, of a different, but with a twist. It involves the Gospel of Barnabas, which some Muslims, as you know, will latch onto that and say, this is proof of the Quran, guys. This is it. I'm like, well, you might have a problem there, because somewhere in there it definitely contradicts the Quran, and it actually contradicts like historical events as well. It's actually a mess. It's a massive mess. There's a lot of theories about how the Gospel of Barnabas originated. Lot of different sporadic dating of the Gospel of Barnabas has been done. Some scholars will go as far as saying it was written in layers over hundreds of years, have been put together by a redactor. So there's a lot of theories about this. So I'm not going to try to say when this thing dates, although there are some that will date it as late as like I think early 2nd millennium.
Yeah. They're actually the manuscripts from my memory. They're Italian and Spanish, and they're 17th century.
That's correct. It's only a couple hundred years old. That's right, 300-400 years old.
Apocryphals, and definitely so. But I think they talk about the Barracledes, which is supposed to be Muhammad, and so that's Muslims' favorite gospel, and they think that's the true one, and it's brilliant. But but other gospels have sort of appeared, like the one that is quite interesting to me is the gospel according to Judas, where Judas is not the villain, and they think about it, it makes quite sense, because he's the one. I mean, remember, Satan was trying to do his best to stop Jesus from being crucified, because if Jesus was crucified, that means the will of God has been achieved. So he's actually trying to stop it from happening. Judas helped it happening. He is the main character. He is the one that actually helped Jesus to complete the mission. So he's not a villain.
Right. In the Gospel of Barnabas, it says, other than Simon of Cyrene being the one crucified in the place of Jesus, it's Judas Iscariot. And but the thing is that the Gospel of Barnabas says Muhammad is the Messiah, which the Quran does not say that. So if the Gospel of Barnabas confirms the Quran, then how do we reconcile that conflict there?
Well, it doesn't really say Muhammad. It says Baraclete, which means the consoler. And the Arabic word for Muhammad, Arabic names have meanings most of the time, and the Muhammad is almost like also can be a title where it says made to be thankful, and they're kind of a fine similarity between the two, but the names have never been explicitly said, so it's like really clutching at straws, literally.
Right, I agree. But what will happen is they'll interpret the Gospel of Barnabas as saying Muhammad is the Messiah. Whether it actually says that or not is a different story. But if that is the correct reading, then it does contradict the Quran, because the Quran doesn't say that. So again, the conclusion still follows. How do we reconcile that contradiction? That can't be done. We got a super chat question. I fished in a tie again. Thank you for your super chat. What's the evidence Muhammad existed and not a title?
The name Muhammad literally actually it's very similar to the Jesus story, where some very limited extra biblical, extra Quranic, in this case, sources have mentioned the name Muhammad, especially his letters to other emperors to embrace Islam. I think there's one in some Armenian records. So there were some other cultures and nations independently talk about him. They could have still talked about the title, because sometimes you and in the antiquity, you and the title could be one. You could be named as part of a title, like the word Pharaoh in the Old Testament. There's no such thing as Pharaoh. There's no Egyptian king called Pharaoh. Pharaoh is actually a title. The ancient Egyptian word is para, which Pharaoh came from. It means the big house, the White House in the U.S. at the moment. And then later on, I think in the Modern Family, not the comedy show, the cartoon, the word has become one with the actual title of the king. So sometimes you can have somebody's title overtaking, but in this case, the word Muhammad was actually mentioned in a couple of extra Quranic sources, and therefore most scholars believe a historical person by the name of Muhammad existed.
When you look at the scholarship that's been done on the historical Muhammad and the origin of Islam, what did you think? What did you think of that? And basically, what do you think the circumstances were that it originated from your opinion? Did Muhammad get Allah from Jews and Christians, or is it more complicated than that?
Well, there are elements of that. I mean, every religion needs a foundation. So you'll find always that every religion believes in the one before, but not the one after, and claims that I'm the final message. So when you do that, because you're going to say, I'm from the same God. Like, even remember with the conversation between gods and Moses, and he said, who should I tell my people? Who should I said I've met? So I'm the God of Abraham, and so when he goes back, so I'm the continuation of that foundational source. And so Jesus did with completing the message and say, well, I came for Israel, and I came to complete the message and build a new covenant, and maybe remove the first one, and is a new covenant which is going to be signed for by my blood and body. And then I think Islam did the same thing. However, they weren't very well read. I think it shows that they didn't understand elements of both, and they made so many errors. So it's always an element of trying to find the foundation, trying to understand the text, convince those who are already in that religion that I am from the same sort of tree of life, and I'm another branch. But adding your own touch on it, and make it suitable for the culture and the environment and the time of that particular generation.
What's interesting is I actually wonder if the Quran, or the authors of the Quran, were familiar with the books of Enoch, and the reason I asked myself that question is because take 3rd Enoch, for instance. 3rd Enoch says that Metatron is the lesser Yahweh. It actually says that in there. It's like, wait a minute, is there 2 Yahwehs now? What's going on here? And because Metatron is an angel that is supposed to be Enoch, because Enoch ascends into heaven, as we see in the book of Genesis. And basically, the books of Enoch continue that story. And he becomes this massive angel called Metatron. Now, he's not a son of God. Okay, so you don't get that. That's not really an explanation for the Uzar thing and the going on in the Quran. But it does make me wonder if there might be a connection, because did somebody looking at that? I'm just speculating. But did that have some inspiration? I wonder about that. But the thing is that, where did they get Uzar from? Why name him that? And that's kind of the complication. It's so strange.
I'm not a big believer in conspiracy theories, like everything is copied, and just somebody's actually read a book and made a copy of it. I
Right.
think human ideas can coincide, just like Charles Darwin coming up with the theory of evolution and Alfred Wallace thinking about the same thing at the same time, and ending having correspondence with Charles Darwin talking about the same thing. So I do think human mind, especially people around the same time, sort of affected by the same sort of myths and ideas and culturally similar, naturally there will be some similarities in the way they think. So while some stories might have been borrowed, I don't have a problem at all thinking that two people might have come up with the same idea or very close at the same time.
Yeah, that could very well be. As I was just saying a moment ago, I was speculating. I'm not sure. But I'm just trying to I was basically guess as to what caused that confusion or that error to even show up in the Quran in the first place. What led to that mistaken conclusion that Jews believe in a Son of God?
As I said, it just really the Muslim didn't get Christianity. They did not, and maybe a bit of Judaism, but Christianity was completely foreign to them. They didn't get it. They didn't understand what a Holy Ghost was. The Eucharist, it was, and even to Jews, they think Christians are sort of off their faces because it's a big departure from the very black and white dude. In Christianity, things are parables and talking in metaphors, and I mean, the followers of Jesus didn't understand him most of the time. Even when he left, it's like, who the hell was that? They didn't know who he was. It was so confusing all the way to the end. But in Judaism and Islam, you get black and white answers.
Now, there actually is. What's interesting is there actually is a Dead Sea Scroll about a vision. It's called a vision of the Son of God. I think it's called something. It's something like that. I haven't looked at it in a bit, but that might be. And I'll admit this is even a stretch somewhat. This is the closest thing you might get to a Son of God at all. But this is a Dead Sea Scroll, and it appears to be treating the Son of God negatively, at least as far as I remember it. It's a title. It's not really definitive either. Even in that text, it's not like, okay, God has a son. That's not really what it's trying to say. That's why I was putting it that way, very carefully. Just throwing that in here, Hi, Fish and Tie. Thank you for another super chat. Enochic Jews became Essenes, became Ebionites, became Muslims. Muhammad was influenced by the Jews and Christians in Arabia. Eisenman, Tabor, etc. Save us.
Yeah, as I said, I don't have a problem with being influenced for sure. Yeah, he had to be. He is claiming that he's coming from the same God, so he must have read. If you're going to claim that your God is the same of the God of the Jews and the Christians, you got to, and your target audience is the infidels of the Medina around the time, who sort of the adulterators and the Christians and the Jews. And if you're going to convince them, of course you're going to bring elements of their book to say, hey, look, that's the same God. He talked about Abraham. Oh, that's the same God. So I have no problems whatsoever thinking, yeah, he must have been influenced. Otherwise, he would have not been able to convince them that he's come from the same God.
I just remembered, and I want to ask this before I forget. When you were discussing about the moon thing, if Muhammad split the moon, there are some Muslims that will look at the moon, pictures of the moon, and say, "Hey, just this curious line on the moon." You know what I'm talking about. I was like, is that proof that's like some damage on the moon there caused by it being split, like a scar?
And the rumors were they say if you go to the supermarkets, you'll not find any super glue. It's all off the shelves. I wonder why. So this is what they used to glue back the moon. As I said, I love science. So I've had a couple of episodes where I explain every a claim of miracle. Maybe this is going to be an interesting conversation in a future conversation. If you'd like to have that conversation where I dissect every single miraculous claim in the Quran and compare it to science, evolution, cosmology. The moon is 3,700 kilometers in diameter. If it's split, and it's been said in the Hadith that half of it was on the top of the moon, top of a mountain, and the other half was on the bottom of the mountain. 3,000, 7,000 kilometers will cover an area between almost Iraq and Egypt. So for this to happen, he's almost thinking it was like a watermelon size, like something that's sort of small. The other peculiar couple of things is it happened at night, and only 1 or 2 witnesses were around, which is it makes me think, what kind of all-wise God, being bothered by creating a miracle of that magnitude, just to present it to a couple of people who might end up narrating it to other people. But wouldn't it be a lot more marvelous if it was witnessed by more people? But also a bigger thing is we have evidence of the Chinese culture documenting a supernova. Supernova, which is an explosion of a giant star, because the sky would be lit for about 2 weeks. It's documented 1,100 years ago. And this event happened in the Saudi Arabia, current modern Saudi Arabia, surrounded by documenting civilizations like the Egyptians and the Sumerian, and so they must have seen this. There is no other single nation independently verified that incident, so it's definitely been added on later on.
All right, so someone in the chat is saying that I'm wrong. 4Q246, which is the vision of the Son of God I was talking about, does not portray the Son of God as negatively. Okay, I suppose you could try to debate it, maybe, but there are scholars that have studied that text, and they concluded the Son of God in there is a reference to Antiochus, the 4th Epiphanes, something like that. Yeah, I think that's his name. Yep. So yeah, it seems at least the scholarship is done on that in which they say that it's referring to Antiochus, and some scholars do interpret it as negative. Just to defend myself there, whether that's really correct or not, I'm not gonna dive into detail on this stream because I'm not gonna talk about this text all stream. But I'm like, it's not talking about Jesus. I can tell you that. I am quite certain it's not about Jesus. No way. Some people do try to make Jesus out to be in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but I don't buy that. That's kind of in the conspiracy territory kind of thing, and no, thank you.
I'm in agreement, completely agreement with you, Jacob. Even like you look at some of the prophecies in Isaiah, about Jesus, and the twisting of the words to make it fit. Like for example, the virgin birth of Jesus, only two of the Gospels mention them, and the Hebrew word that was used was Alma, which doesn't mean virgin. Alma means young lady. The Hebrew word is Batula, and it was not used. So they tried to make it really fit so hard, and it's not forthcoming.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a situation where I can't remember the exact name of the manuscript, but it was one of the manuscripts of one of the books of Enoch found within the Dead Sea Scrolls. And there were Christian apologists trying to say, hey, we found a copy of the Gospel of Mark. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute now. Like, whoa, you're saying that the Gospel of Mark was written in, I can't remember if it was written in Hebrew or Aramaic, this Dead Sea Scroll that they mistakenly identified as a fragment of Mark. Because they were trying so hard, like, yeah, we want all these 4 Gospels be written in Hebrew or something like that, or Aramaic, written by eyewitnesses. So that means every single thing in there happened. It's real. I'm like, then it turned out it was actually a manuscript of, I think it was one of the books of Enoch, and so it fell apart. They tried so hard to make that a text of Mark, though. It was hilarious, really.
Yeah, it's a thorn in our sides to have all four Gospels written in Koine Greek, and it's like, okay, well, and decades after the event, almost 100 years later in case of John. So it's just, it makes it very unreliable. Even Paul's letters, how many forgeries are in there? I think 6 or 7 out of the letters. So the whole thing it's got lots of holes.
Paul stuff has actually gotten even more complicated now, I would say, because now when you plug in Marcion, because last couple of years I've been really for the last 5 years I've really been looking into Marcion, and the last 4 years I've been trying to make my audience aware of Marcion and his New Testament, because that's a big thing, especially right now in scholarship. And because Marcion's Paul, I'm not going to get into this too much. I don't want to get off topic. But since you brought up Paul, I'm just going to say Marcion's edition of Paul, the Apostolicon, or Apostolos, whatever you want to call it, is a lot shorter than the one we have in the New Testament. And it's interesting because when you read like Marcion's edition of 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, what if I were to tell you that both of them were like about a page long? That's it. You can imagine just how much shorter they are from the canonical text. You could read them in barely a few minutes, less than a few minutes. I'm like, both of them together. I'm like, and they don't really conflict. At least back when I read them, I didn't interpret them as contradicting themselves. In the canonical text, however, 1st, 2nd Thessalonians in the canonical New Testament, they do contradict themselves, absolutely. And there's a lot of scholarship done, complicated scholarship done on 2nd Thessalonians not being written by Paul. It has a lot to do with those contradictions, and same thing with Ephesians and Colossians, 1st, 2nd Timothy, Titus, especially those 3 texts. They're called the pastoral epistles. You know what's interesting? I'm just going to say this real quick, and then I'm going to shut up about Marcion. Is the pastoral epistles are not even in Marcion's edition of Paul. They're not even there at all. Which I would say that definitely leans credence to them not being by Paul, because Marcion's New Testament doesn't seem to be aware of the pastoral epistles. I'll just leave it there on that. But yeah, it's when you look at what Muslim apologists try to say about trying to reconcile the Quran's view of Jesus with the New Testament's Jesus. How do they get around Paul in the gospel saying that Jesus was clearly crucified? There's no evidence that the first Christians were ever confused or got it wrong about Jesus being crucified. How do they wrestle with that?
Well, they don't really need to, because they think it's been corrupted. So they reckon it's been actually changed by people. And even when we talked about the person who got crucified was made to look like him, it would be quite logical that actually genuinely thought it was him. So there would be no problems whatsoever. The problem is it lies with God, because it's almost God becomes a deceiver here. It's deceiving people, because unless you tell people immediately right and then you're cool. But he didn't. He waited some 6 centuries later to tell them, oh, sorry, that was candid camera. That was like, that wasn't really what was happening. So 6 centuries of people believed their eyes, or believed the eyes of the witnesses, and just to get to know that they were deceived by God then. But Muslims might argue, no, it was revealed in the true Bible and the true gospel, which was either hidden deliberately by Christians, or was lost or changed. So it's a goalpost moving situation in all 3 Abrahamic religions. It doesn't matter what you do and what you get, because the situation is so elastic and is so vague that they can claim whatever the hell they like, and there is nothing. Yep. You can't catch them. Everything's possible with God.
Yeah. that really leads me right into this next question. So if they believe that the Bible was capable of being corrupted by men, right? Then what makes them think the Quran wasn't capable of the same kind of corruption?
Don't get me started, Jacob. One of the classic circular reasoning you'll ever find, which is, oh, because God said so did the Quran. So there's a verse in the Quran where God says, by Jesus, no, he didn't swear by Jesus, but he swore that he is going to learn from his previous mistakes and he's going to keep this one intact. And it didn't work because there are different versions of the Quran. This one is read in Egypt and one is read in Morocco, and they're different. There's words have been omitted, new sentences added. Wow. It has not been preserved. But even the admission, I mean, let's examine this for a second. An all-knowing God, a God that knows the future. And it gets you to think about, why would God bloody always chooses the worst way to communicate with humans, via language and words, and gives us Lucifer or Satan the most modern way of communicating with humans. Satan can talk directly into your brain in your 21st century lingo. If you're German, Spanish, doesn't matter. You live in the southern states, it does not matter. He will talk to you as if you're listening to yourself. But God would sort of fix himself to language, which moves like no tomorrow, because words have no intrinsic meanings. They have utilities and they change over time, and understanding change over time. And it would give himself such a way, the worst way to communicate with humans, and gives his adversary the better way of communicating. So it's a failure. And it also suggests that God is trying to improve, learning from his, the first two attempts gone wrong. So let's make sure this time around, exactly like the two trees in the Garden of Eden. It's like, oh my God, he ate from the tree of good and evil. Let's hide the tree of eternal life. So, otherwise he'll be a God like us. He's a very strange God, very reactive God.
Absolutely. I really got to ask you this. So how do Muslim apologists dance around the different Qurans that you were just talking about? How do they wrestle with that?
They say that God has created different versions for different people and with different dialects, so they can understand it. Even though they believe there's something called Al-Lawh al-Mahfuz, which is the secret tablet that was affixed even before creating humanity. So certain verses talking about certain people were written way before these people have existed. So, for example, there's a guy called Abu Lahab, who was the uncle of Muhammad. He was actually the protector of Muhammad when he was spreading Islam, but he never entered Islam. There was one time where Muhammad sort of gathered people and talks about that he is going to bring a new religion, and he literally said, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but in Arabic, he almost said, "Fuck you, Muhammad. Is this what you sort of brought us here? You woke us all up for that?" And there's a Quranic verse that descended from heaven that's actually literally God is saying, "No, fuck you, Abu Lahab, for accusing Muhammad for saying so." So imagine God is actually cursing another person for cursing Muhammad, and that was written before that man has ever existed. So goodbye, free will.
Wow. Yeah, that's hilarious. Somebody was saying in the chat that the Gospel of Barnabas is seen as a clear fabrication by Muslims. No idea why you believe Islam supports its legitimacy. I did say some Muslims, okay? Just to defend myself. I said some Muslims. I didn't say all Muslims, okay? I know a lot of Muslims don't accept the Gospel of Barnabas, but some Muslims do. Some. That's all I did add that. I didn't leave that out in my statement.
You did, and I heard you. I heard you quite clearly. You know, you did not fall into the hasty generalization fallacy.
Yep. I fish no tie. Thank you for your super chat. Why did Gabriel choke Muhammad in the cave?
Oh, it was a sexual thing. No, I'm joking. So you gotta have some fun. Life's too short to take things too seriously.
I agree. Yeah.
He kind of, because it's a very funny thing about the appearance of God, and something that always sort of made me think. You would think if there's a God in this universe, when he appears to people, then an overwhelming feeling of peace and happiness, and it will be a wonderful feeling. But it seems that God is actually, even in nobody's sort of seen me and lived. In Quran, it says, if I appear in front of the mountain will tremble from fear and collapse. Like, okay, so God doesn't bring happiness and peace, and so is Gabriel. When Gabriel first appeared to Muhammad, he thought it was a demon, and he was so scared, and he ran to his wife and cousin and said, please cover me. He was shivering. And then they told him, there was an angel, but he was convinced he saw a demon. And when the first Quranic verses where he said, recite, and he said, what? I beg your pardon? Recite. And then he shook him, and he said, the first verses of the Quran, recite, as in read after me. But he actually sort of cast the fear into his heart, and he was quite afraid. But I guess to maybe get him to focus or concentration was he about to say. But again, the appearance of God and angels of God seem to cast horror into people's hearts, not peacefulness, which is a very strange thing.
Yeah, and here's something that you and I both hear. People will say that when you criticize God or Allah and the things he did, the horrific things that this character supposedly did, it's like, or ordered other people to do, you're taking it out of context. Out of context, I'm like, oh, okay, well, we're special pleading there, aren't we? I'll give you a quick example. When you look at the book of Ezekiel, there's a very interesting statement there about God, Adonai, regretting ordering people to sacrifice their firstborns. In the book of Ezekiel. Like, whoa, wait a minute over here. Was it Canaanites bad? Canaanites, they sacrifice people. I think what's really going on is they're talking about the Carthaginians, because that's where, like, if I remember correctly, that's where most of the evidence of situations like that going on, where they sacrifice infants to Balu Haman. Balu or Baal is a common title. It's not a name of just one god in canon. It's a bunch of different gods, as a matter of fact. Like there's Balu Hadu and a bunch of other ones called Balu. And Balu Haman kind of reminds me of the way the Hebrew Bible is describing Moloch. Probably where they got it from. Regardless, when they do it, it's bad. But when God orders it, it's like, no, you're taking that out of context. He never did. You're misreading Ezekiel. That's not what's going on. I'm like, no, I'm not misreading Ezekiel at all. It's the same thing, different God. Okay? There ain't no getting around it. They sacrifice infants in Carthage to Balu Haman, and you're seeing child sacrifice or infant sacrifice with Adonai in the book of Ezekiel, and they're moving away from that. They're abolishing it. Okay, obviously that's what the book of Ezekiel is about. It's like getting not completely about, but it's one of the things it just mentions that, because they're getting rid of that, they're changing their practices. But at some point here, that was allowed for Adonai. So yes, Adonai is immoral. Okay, Just like what was going on in Carthage with Bala Hammam was immoral then. Is immoral. You get what I'm trying to say? It's just...
But you see, the argue, and the Muslims argue the same thing, like in Exodus, where God kills all the firstborn of the Egyptians to soften the Pharaoh's heart, and they will say, okay, well, he is the creator of lives. He can't take it if he wants to. They're complete. It's that sort of slavery attitude where I don't get is like, well, he can crush us if you. It's almost like as if they're submitted to the fact that that's it. He can crush them if you wanted to, and there's nothing they can do. They can't really run away from him, so they might as well submit. Luckily, such God does not exist because he's literally the married bachelor. It doesn't exist and cannot exist because he's he's a kind of follows the law of non-contradiction, unless it's an evil creator. Then the problem of evil and the problem of divine hiddenness and things like that will completely vanish away. But then that kind of deceiving evil God, what is the guarantee that whatever you do is going to end up in heaven? It could be one with a sense of humor where all atheists are the one going to be in heaven because we were the skeptic ones who are a lot more interesting to watch rather than those robotic, nodding religious people who follow every single rule. So, you go figure.
Right. The point, and just so my point is that I was trying to make earlier, case just to make it even more clear. If Bala Hammam exists, and he ordered the Carthaginians to do that, to sacrifice infants to him, he's immoral. If Adonai exists, and he ordered the Jews to do that at one point, and then change his mind, he's immoral. Okay? I was like, well, he changed his mind. If somebody wants to go hardcore apologist, I guess, and try to say, okay, and they say something like, I admit that happened, but he changed his mind. He became better. I'm like, what he did was still wrong.
Yeah,
right?
And I mean, that's the whole thing about God is, and this is where they argue about morality. They say human morality is forever changing, and there's no ultimate arbiter. God has fixed morality, the morality that never changes, because if God changes his morality, it means it changes his mind. It can be God, because change sort of occurred to God, and therefore is evolving, just like one of us. So the whole thing about the divine command theory in philosophy, in terms of the axiology and the philosophy of ethics, divine command theory means that God is ultimate arbiter, and because of the fixed morality that can never change, then God is way more superior to the changing morality of humans. But you see, God is the ultimate relativist. He actually changes his mind and orders one thing and its opposite when it suits. He's a moral relativist.
There's a question in the chat about if I think that Marcion was right, that the God of the Old Testament is not the same as the God of the New Testament. Just to give everybody a very brief recap on what that question is about, there's a text called the Antithesis by Marcion. And in it, he suggests that the God of Judaism is actually the devil and is not the God of the New Testament. Jesus is the son of a more merciful, different God, higher God. And this is the same kind of thing that the Gnostics call the monad. Now, when I think about that, it's like, it kind of comes off to me as like, okay, these are ancient Christians that realized when they were reading the Bible there was a problem, but they weren't willing to get rid of Jesus because they're kind of tied together, you know what I'm saying, in the New Testament. So when it's like, okay, let me keep Jesus, make him the son of a different God, so that way I keep my stuff. Like I have my, it's like it's a scenario. It's like I have my cake and eat it too, that kind of thing. So they'll get rid of half of what they believe and keep the other half, if you get what I'm trying to say. So it's like, okay, I'll get rid of some of it. I can't get rid of all of it, though. I got to hold on to some of it. So that's kind of how it comes off to me. Do I really think that they're not the same? No. I think they're the same, but the New Testament is making changes to the God, though. It's like a sequel that's retconning stuff, okay? It's the same character, but they're retconning. They're changing details of this of God, or basically that's where I'm coming from there.
I'm sorry, I've got to comment on a commentary eating person talking about scholarship. We weren't discussing whether, and this is where it gets completely wrong. We weren't discussing whether angels do indeed bring cast horror into people's hearts. We were discussing the logic of it. And maybe I should have introduced myself and my credentials, and I never try to do that. And what I do is in terms of academic work, but philosophy. I've got a master's degree in philosophy, so this is a logical issue that we're referring to, not a fact of a matter. What we were saying is, shouldn't the angels of God bring peacefulness? We know that they have not brought that, and this is what we are contesting.
And really, I think a follow-up question in light of that question is I want to direct this to you. Okay, let me rephrase. Okay, so Hanney, and a related question to what I was just talking about and answering. Some claim, and usually this comes from Christians that are criticizing Islam, that Allah is not the Christian God. It's a completely different God. Sometimes they'll say absurd things like it's the devil pretending to be God, even though the Quran does mention Satan, does it not? So I'm like, okay, so how do you make that work? And there's also heavily ridiculed theories in critical scholarship about Allah's origins, like including the moon god theory stuff. So what do you think about that stuff, Hanney?
Well, Lucifer is mentioned, and Satan's mentioned he's called Iblis in the Quran. And there's a lot of questions about whether he is working on his own or working with a lot of jinns, what they call jinns, and he's got like an army. He doesn't work on his own. And I think that in the Christian faith there are something similar. But those who sort of try to attack the Quran might contest that, well, if Satan is quite a deceiver, of course he would come up with writings he would claim to be the God, and talks about himself to make it really sort of catch, because it's a great plot. He's mentioning himself as in the adversary and the horrible one, but pretending to be God to set you up, to get you to do the wrong things. But the question is, where's God then? Who's got sovereignty over the universe if Satan is running amok? It begs the question. Or is it like the Book of Job where they're working together? Quite. When you talk about, sort of read the Book of Job, and you see the harmony and the almost the bets they had on this poor guy, and they seem to have a cohesive relationship where Satan is asking permission from God to do what he needed to do with Job. So, and God is so vain that he was lured almost by Satan to get into that bet, and to ensure that Satan understand that Job is indeed a pious man. So it's almost a God's vanity. And the devil seems to do what he does best, that end up luring God himself into committing one of the worst actions of the Old Testament.
And if Satan's so bad, why did God create Satan? And he can't stop him either, apparently. What's going on here? This is a mess.
Begs the question. The Muslim will tell you it's part of the test, because it's a test.
Of course, and Christians say the same kind of thing. And like, when is Revelation supposed to happen, everybody? When's the final battle? And really, when you look at the Gospels, it's like really just falls apart, especially when you realize they were expecting it to happen in the first century. Some of you will not taste death before the Son of Man comes. It's in the Gospels. I'm like, that's not thousands of years in the future, people. That's in the first century. Explain this to me. It's crazy.
It's an interesting. I do understand why. We probably need to go into the empathetic bits and about religion and why, because I think religion is human heritage, and when you see people burning the Quran, and I don't like that. I think it's a treasure, even though with the atrocities in it. I think it's human. It's a manuscript of how we were in the past, and how we behaved, and our worst fears, and our ignorances and knowledge, and the way we treated each other. So it should be dealt with care and understanding in the context, in the right context. Obviously, if you believe in it, becomes problematic. But if you think that humans wrote this, and it conveys and betrays all our fears and all our concerns and knowledge, then it's invaluable. It's a very important document.
So I'll take this super chat just real quick. Islamic knowledge, thank you for your super chat. Why so religious here? Why was I timed out? I don't know. I didn't time you out. One of the moderators, I guess, did. So back to the topic. One more thing I'd like to ask you about before we close is the Hadith. I had a scholar on the show, Dr. Joshua J. Little, and he talked a lot. He spent 3 hours talking about the Hadith. And it was really fascinating, the stuff he was saying, because it really enlightened me, because I'm not familiar. I'm not really that familiar with the Hadith. So it really familiarized me with the text. Do Muslims try to use the Hadith to try to explain things? Do some Muslims try to use the Hadith to explain things away in the Quran? Do they try to use it to assist them with the Quran?
Yeah, the Quran is not complete, even if they try to tell you so, because a lot of things, I'll tell you a very simple thing. If you don't use the Hadith, you won't be able to know how to pray in Islam. So the 5 prayers a day, it's only mentioned in the Hadith. If you follow the Quran, you'll only pray 3 times a day. So a lot of things have been explained further, or been completed, or been added to the Quran. So the Quran isn't by a long shot complete. And the problem is, as you know, in historical academia, the further away from the events in terms of writing, the less reliable. And we're talking about somebody called Bukhari, who lived some 200 years after the event in current Azerbaijan, or wasn't even an Arabic speaker, who took 600,000 hadith or so and made them into 3,000 or something. So actually, if you do the math, you would find that this person would have no time to eat in the day. Honestly, if you do the math, it's quite impossible. But okay, we'll let it sort of fly. So imagine, and these were the best of the hadith, 3,000 to 4,000. So a lot of rubbish were sort of filtered out. But how did he know? He obviously heard, and that's the sort of narration, and it's a Chinese whisper and a telephone sort of game. Somebody who memorized certain things, and understanding human memory, and what people and intentions. It's probably the least reliable thing you could ever convey a message with. It's completely an utter absurdity for God to complete his religion in such a way. And it's been repeated again. In the Torah, you get the Talmud and the Tanakh and the later interpretations of the sages, and you get the same sort of thing repeated, because humans can't help themselves. What happens is cognitive and dissonance, where morality is advancing, and people who wants to remain religious need to make sense of what happened in the past. So they put weird context, or they say, well, this is frozen in the end of time, so they can live with themselves. Because I think humanity's morality is advanced way beyond all three Abrahamic faiths combined.
Well, thank you for joining me today, Hanney Seylim.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed myself.
Likewise. I wanted to tell everybody real quick that I have the critical faculty tagged in below the video, so we want to go over there and subscribe to his channel. I'll do so, and
I'll do
anybody watching this.
If anybody from critical faculty watching, Jacob is. This is the first time I'm talking to you, and I feel like I've got a brother now. So I think it's not going to be our last conversation because I loved the interactions.
Likewise, Hanney. I had a lot of fun. I really did. And I want to thank everybody for viewing this and the super chatters. I appreciate that. The super chats. I appreciate the support. And I'll see everybody later. Thanks again, Hanney.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron. And or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.